Hi, my name is Linda. I'm presenting today as a recording, as unfortunately I'm not able to make my presentation time, although I am looking forward to attending the conference more broadly, and I'm very excited to be a part of this wonderful panel. My paper today that I'm presenting is about critical stitching as a decolonial and reparative practice, and I'll be talking about the work Cloaking, Quilting, Reckoning, We Stole Wages, which is a textile work, and it's a larger project of 3 textile pieces, but today I'll just talk about the first one, which is called We Stole Wages. But before I begin, I would like to pay my respects to the Woiwurrung Wurundjeri people of the Eastern Kulin Nation on whose lands I speak today, and on whose lands I'm very fortunate enough to live. And I would like to acknowledge that these lands were never ceded and sovereignty was never ceded. So I absolutely pay my respects to the elders, and to acknowledge that these lands have always been sites of learning and collaboration and of practice. So today, hopefully, we'll explain some of the ideas behind the project as a broad project, but also the particular aspects of this first textile work. And really, what started it was reading this book, Not Just Black and White, by Lesley and Tammy Williams. And through this work, which is it's a kind of conversation between Lesley and Tammy, who are mother and daughter, about the stolen wages shame in Australia's history, which is particular in this book to Queensland and to the ways in which young Aboriginal people, children as well as young adults, were kind of coerced and forced into indentured service, or what we would call now slavery. So Lesley and Tammy, the book goes on to talk about how this initiative, if you like, this government initiative, was devised by the local Queensland government, which was at the time headed up by the Conservative politician Joby Elkie-Peterson. And the young people were supposed to have a wage. But many of them never saw the wage. That it seemed to be like this kind of a bit of a myth. They were told they were paid, but they never actually saw the money. And over the years, through talking to other people who'd had her own a similar background to Lesley's, she realised that, and others realised that these wages were still owed to them. And so a whole campaign ensued. And they basically developed a class action against the Queensland government to have the stolen wages returned to them. And through that process, they uncovered how Joby Elkie-Peterson had actually used these stolen wages of these kind of enslaved children and young people to build the Ipswich hospital. So he used that as funds to build a hospital. And after many decades, it eventually came to light, and it was a huge scandal. And the class action was successfully kind of presented and succeeded. So this was a really important story and history, and I was obviously very interested in the whole stolen wages aspect, but the thing that resided with me in terms of my own art practice was these experiences of domesticity and this enforced experience and the irony of it being about caring and nurturing um, uh, in ways that were so violent and enforced. Of course, this is a story I'm telling here of Australia, but this is a common story for young women, particularly across the world, and particularly young women of colour, and how people like my countrymen and other non-Aboriginal people have enforced young women of colour into this kind of indentured service and slavery. And so for me, the kind of ideas around what is caring and what is nurturing, the duality of how that is presented, but through this kind of violent, enslaved position. So I started to think about the environment of the home and this the idea of domestic textiles that would have been kind of presented, and these inscriptions of domesticity that would be everywhere and being used by the young women like Lesley, and if you've looked at these kinds of domestic textiles from the kind of 50s and 60s and 70s, which was the period of time when a lot of young women were in this situation, there is a particular kind of there's a particular design and a particular kind of semiotic representation of the land and of this country, Australia, in these textiles. The image you're seeing here is a snapshot of a show that's actually on at the Queensland State Library at the moment on textiles and tea towels, particularly of this period. And so it was quite interesting to go and see this exhibition and to see how different people who've been involved in the production of these tea towels have been have started now to think about the imagery of them and the design of them and the semiotic codings that they produce. And so for me, what was interesting is this notion of reinscription. And so as a non-Indigenous person, a kind of trend, if you like, was at the time people would have souvenir textiles from places that they'd visited. So they might go on holiday, or they might go on a road trip, or visit relatives, or so on. And they would buy these textiles as a kind of souvenir or memento of the place, and how the representation of that place is completely stripped of any kind of notion of country or of cultural belonging, and is reinscribed through a kind of white lens, and the types of ways that facets of the geology and ecology is represented through these kind of textiles, and that becomes the image that is seen by the young women as they do this indentured or enslaved domestic work. And that this, to me, was perhaps an avenue to think about critically through this decolonial reparative practice, and to actually destroy these works, which have got a lot of there's a lot of affect around these types of objects. They're quite collectible, and they're seen as kind of historic and pastoral, and there's a lot of kind of sentimentality around these types of objects. In this show that's at the Queensland State Library is this tea towel, which I just have to put in, which is really, I just find so ironic that this tea towel would have been in the homes of some of those kitchens that these young women would have worked in, and that is Joby Ockie-Peterson. Obviously, this is a tea towel from the time when he was the state premier. And you can see here perhaps a little how the map features beef production and farming, which was, kind of the income generation for a lot of Queenslanders, and why there was this indentured labour domestic service initiative, if you like, because of the massive shortage of people to work on the cattle stations and sheep stations. So I began by thinking about these domestic textiles and what to do with them, and how to kind of destroy them, take them apart, deconstruct them, and through that process enter a practice of domestic stitching through the production of these quilts. And through that process, slicing up these textiles into these kind of sections, dismantling the imagery and rearranging the imagery, and taking away their affect and taking away their kind of capacity to act as a whole object, tea towel by tea towel, if you like, and to kind of really dismember them and decommission them in terms of their collectible properties, and to make an object by hand, and to do that on a daily basis. And so I did a year of stitching, and the design is quite basic. It's just squares, hand stitched, hand cut, and then hand quilted. And through that process of doing this daily stitching, thinking about the ideas and the theories informing the work, and my role in that history, my ongoing role in decolonial practice, but also acknowledging that we still live in an incredibly colonial country that privileges whiteness, and that is not it hasn't kind of addressed decolonization really very effectively, and certainly racism still very much exists within Australia. And so this daily practice enabled me to do that through the construction of this quilt work. And so I'll quickly go through these images as I'm heading towards the end of my 20 minutes. But this kind of shows you the making process, and how these textiles were sliced up and cut up into squares, and then stitched together in random configurations. And then I used just a very basic running stitch, and using the colours of the kind of different types of ochre that we have in Australia. So each work has a slightly different sheen once it's finished. The first work has very red ochre. This is a snapshot from the second quilt, which is just in progress, and that has the yellow, and the third quilt will have the very dark brown ochre. So the three of them together will have a different sheen. And then the statements that are stitched in on top of the quilts to actually address the non-Indigenous people in the room. And this was one thing I really, really strongly wanted to do. So I pull on the tradition, the kind of textile traditions of course, textile works from across the world, but the kind of discursive art of people like Tony Albert and Vernon R. Key, who have made statements to people, Richard Bell also, statements to audience members about racism and colonial histories in Australia. I wanted to address, as a non-Indigenous person, I wanted to address the other non-Indigenous people in the room, to bring them into the centre of that discussion and to directly address non-Indigenous people and say, this is what we have done and this is our history and this is the ongoing things that those histories impact on today. So the statements directly address the role and complicity of non-Indigenous people in these particular scenarios. And so you can see here some of the progress of the stitching around the statements, which are then I created from cut up denim, and that was also to acknowledge that it wasn't just women who were placed in these service roles, that young boys and young men were also placed in farm labouring roles beyond their choice, and a lot of those young men faced awful, violent experiences at the hands of the non-Indigenous people they had to work for. And so here you can see one of the words being stitched on there with the denim. And so the importance for me has been this kind of ongoing daily commitment, and how that is a form of decolonial and reparative practice. It is not a quick process. I am forced to really think about the time commitment, and also the stress, physical stress of doing this work on a daily basis. And in doing so, it pays attention to that commanding of bodies and minds and time and effort of young people who really had no choice in the matter. And so this final image, and what I'll end on, is the final image of the first quilt, and this is in the International Art Textile Biennale, and so this will be travelling around Australia. It starts in January at East Gippsland Gallery, and will travel to all the states with the collection throughout 2023 and into 2024. So thank you for watching, and I look forward to any questions you may have. You'll see me at the conference, and thanks very much.